What can the industry do as a whole, or what can the management do as a whole to kind of attract and also retain and keep that younger talent in the business, in your opinion?
Yeah, so retention is a huge issue in the construction industry. People, it's so easy to move around that people do it, and there's a lot of people, a lot of companies sort of go out of the way to retain people. And I think the basis of that is understanding your employees and what they want to do. If you've got a motivated employee who feels valued in what they do, then 9 times out of 10 they're going to stay there because they feel rewarded for the hard work that they put in. And again, McLaren, I've been at McLaren just nearly 18 months now, and it's one of the best companies that I've seen for learning and development. You get an annual training schedule, which is everything mapped out from what you need to be able to do your job and what you need to develop, and that is all mapped out for you throughout the year. And it's really really good, and something that I've definitely been keen to push